The night air is heavy with the scent of wet stone. Somewhere in the dark, water runs, not the gentle babble of a country stream, but the deep, unbroken sigh of 1,000 channels carrying the lifeblood of a city you will never fully see. Tonight, you fall asleep in the year 112 CE, under the watch of Emperor Trajan, in the belly of Rome's greatest pride and dirtiest secret, the aqueducts. You lie on your back on a bed of woven reeds that scratch through the thin cloth beneath you. The air smells faintly of lime mortar, and the ghosts of storms that passed weeks ago. Somewhere above, a cartwheel grinds against cobblestones. Somewhere below, a rat drags a bit of bread toward its hole. By morning, you will rise to join the crew. Men with arms like carved oak, spines bent like the arches they tend, hands always damp from the cold bite of the water. You will haul stone, scrape channels, and clear blockages that stink worse than a latrine in high summer. You will taste iron, clay, and fatigue in every breath. For now, though, you listen to the sound of water moving where no river ever flowed, and you wonder if you will survive even one day here. Sleep, if you can. You sleep in the seam between stone and water, where the city's thirst hums like a buried hive, and the night presses its knee on your ribs. The bed is a rectangle of woven reeds, beaten flat by other backs before yours, softened by sweat and the powder of old mortar that sifts down whenever the arch above sighs. Your blanket is scratchy wool that smells of sheep and river fog. It never truly dries, only changes degrees of damp. When you pull it over your shoulders, a cold thread runs the length of your spine, as if the night itself were drawing a line there and promising to find you again tomorrow. The room is not a room, not in the way you once imagined. It is a long, low mouth carved into the side of a service tunnel, braced with timber darker than the dark. A space left over after the engineers took everything they needed, and the foreman shrugged at what remained. The ceiling kisses the scrape on your nose if you sit up too fast. The floor slopes almost imperceptibly toward the hidden channel, and you can feel that slope under your shoulder blade, the way a riverbed feels its way toward the sea. The water's murmur reaches you as a steady, unjudging note. It is older than your bones and will outlast them. When the city sleeps, it does not. You share this hollow with 12 other men, fewer when the work goes poorly, more when a contractor swears he's found a bargain in the market, and the bargain turns out to have a cough. You learn each man by the sound he makes in the dark. Tullus grinds his teeth like a mill grinding olive pits. Rufus whistles through a split in his front tooth, a thin reed note that rises and fades with his breath. The big Dalmatian snores in a way that rattles the boards, then stops suddenly and makes everyone else hold their breath until, after a hung moment, he barks once, like a dog in a dream, and the tide begins again. You will never know some of their names. You know their feet by smell, and their injuries by shape, which is almost the same thing. The lamp in the corner is an old amphora mouth cracked into a cradle. Olive oil burns in it on good nights. On bad nights, when the quartermaster shakes his head and scratches a number onto a tablet that might as well be your ribs, you feed the wick with animal fat that smokes and gives the air a bitter taste, like a secret being told too loudly. The flame is small and stubborn. It paints everything in the color of old coins. Moths find it in the warm months, and the flicker becomes a dance of small suicides. In winter, the flame draws its shoulders in and sulks, and your breath makes clouds that hang low enough to touch. The walls sweat. That is the first lesson. Stone and mortar look like the definitions of certainty, but when the aqueduct eases past, something in the air loosens and beads and slips. You wake with your hair damp and your eyelids heavy. In the night, tiny drops collect on the curve where wall meets arch, and release their grip with a patience that feels almost human. You listen to them fall. Tap, tap, a brief silver note in the dark, vanishing the instant it appears. The water teaches you its grammar. Nothing is dry for long, nothing is finished, everything moves. The wind is cold again, just like yesterday, just like tomorrow. A rat lives behind the storage crate where extra picks and a coil of rope pretend to sleep. You have never seen it whole, only parts of it in different lights. The pale crescent of an ear twitching, the long whiskers testing air like a priest's fingers at an altar, the black bead of an eye reflecting your fire back to you, as if to ask whether you're sure you're awake. Sometimes it drags treasures past your head, a crust of bread, a curl of leather, once a coin green with age that it tried to bite. Perhaps hoping it would bleed, you leave it be. It leaves you be. You are both professionals. Above you, somewhere just beyond the skin of the ceiling, the city's heart crawls, wheels on stone, voices arguing about nothing at an hour when only the deities are listening, and even they seem bored. The shout of a man who is drunk enough to mistake his own shadow for an enemy. The clop of hooves in a rhythm that tells you without opening your eyes whether the rider is hurrying home or fleeing trouble. You will never see the riders. You will know them by the way their sound enters and leaves the world. That is another lesson the water gives. Everything that matters passes close and remains unseen. Your palate has a memory. When you roll onto your side, it remembers the men who did the same long before you arrived. Men who cursed and said the name of a child. Men who counted their pay by the weight of their hope and found the scale wanting. The reeds creak, but they also sing. A thin, fibrous hum. You can tell how tired you are by whether the sound annoys you or comforts you. On the worst nights, the reeds feel like unkept promises. On the better ones, they are reeds beside a riverbank, and you are a boy again, sleeping where you should not, face to the sky, mouth half open to catch the stars. When it rains, the water's voice deepens. More than once you have woken with the taste of iron in your mouth, and the knowledge, not the suspicion, that upstream somewhere a joint has wept a little heavier than usual. The overseer calls you superstitious when you say such things out loud, but in the morning he sends you and 2 others to check a section of channel you named in your sleep. You are right often enough that he stops calling you anything. You do not mind. Names are for men whose feet stay dry. You are one of the wet-footed. The water speaks to you as it speaks to ivy and to stone. It tells you when it is pleased and when it is plotting. Tonight it plans nothing but to move. The man beside you, the raven, earned his name because he collects shiny things. A bent nail, a shard of black-glazed pottery with a fish painted on it, a brass button polished to a sun. He keeps them in a leather pouch, and sometimes, when the lamp is moody and the wind hisses under the door, in a way that makes the night feel too large, he will pour the trinkets onto the blanket between you and arrange them into a tiny city. A nail for an obelisk, the pottery shard for a public bath, the button for a good man's house. You watch his hands move. He pretends that the city belongs to him, that he is a god whose thumb can push a street to anywhere he likes. When the wick gutters, he sweeps the city back into the pouch, puts the pouch beneath his cheek, and sleeps on it like a dragon on hoard. In the morning, that cheek bears the faint, perfect circle of a world that no one else will ever visit. There is a crack in the wall like a crooked smile. When the sun is high, it leaks a blade of light, thin as a promise you doubt. At night, the crack whistles when the wind slips through the tunnel outside, and if you close your eyes you can pretend that the whistle is a distant flute played by someone who remembers a meadow you forgot. You have learned to love that sound. It arrives with a question you know the answer to, and still choose to consider what would it be like to sleep under a sky not fenced by stone. What would it be like to know that the stars, those slow-breathing animals, were watching you without pity? The water answers for you. Keep low, keep warm, keep moving. Do not ask what the stars think. Lice are the true citizens here. They commute from seam to seam, from wool to hair, diligent as accountants. You scratch quietly in the dark until the itch becomes its own kind of music. A metronome reminding you that the body has boundaries even when the mind is trying to dissolve into the sound of water. On good days you warm your clothes by the lamp and believe the heat discourages them. On bad days you know they do not care. You learn to negotiate, you keep your collar open. They stay away from the back of your knee. Treaties are never honoured. War resumes at dawn. Sometimes the night brings voices that do not belong to any men. The water has a way of shaping air into the suggestion of words. It's a trick. You know it's a trick. And still, when sleep loosens its hold, you hear your mother ask if you are eating, and you hear your brother tell a joke you thought you had forgotten. Once you hear your own voice saying your name the way an old friend would, and for a long, still minute you are certain you will answer. The wind is cold again, just like yesterday. You roll onto your stomach and tuck your hands beneath the blanket and let the false voices drift back into the current that made them. A cough begins 3 pallets down. You count between the coughs as if there were a prize for accuracy. 7 breaths. 9 breaths. A wheeze that sounds like canvas tearing. The cough does not stop. In the morning, the coughing man will insist he is fine, which means he is not. You will pass him your portion of hot water and pretend that generosity is the same as medicine. He will drink and say that the heat feels good all the way down. For a few hours it will. In the small hours when even the rats consider moderation, the cough returns and lays its hand on his chest again. You learn not to think of the future as anything beyond the length of your arm. You keep a piece of chalk under your palate. It is not proper chalk, just a pale pebble that leaves a mark when coaxed. On nights when sleep moves away and stands in the doorway with its arms crossed, you draw small, stupid things on the timber bracing the wall. A fish, a loaf, a ladder with only a few rungs, a river that forgets how to curve. In the morning the drawings are smudged and the timber looks like any other timber. Still, the act matters. You are telling the wood that you were here, that the night had your shape for a few hours, that you refused to be braided into the sound of water without first touching something that would remember. The foreman who sleeps in a better hole where the ceiling does not shed grit into his cup walks past your door sometimes when he thinks everyone is down. His sandals slap. He stops and listens to the water, then to the breathing. If he hears talking, he makes a note on his tablet. If he hears nothing but the city's pulse in your throats, he moves on. You do not dislike him. He is as bound as you are, only to different things. In the day he shouts. In the night he is small, like the rest of you, and the sound he makes when he exhales is the same sound you make when you put a heavy weight down and straighten your back and pretend the sky is not taking that as permission to set something heavier in your hands. You keep a sprig of rosemary wrapped in cloth in your pouch. It is dried and mostly without scent, and yet if you press it hard between your fingers and then touch your nose, the ghost of green and sun returns, and for a heartbeat you remember a hill not made by men. You do this before sleep, the way some men kiss a charm. You do it knowing that memory is a generous liar. The rosemary tells you that the air was always clean and your feet were always quick. The water listens to this and says nothing. It has seen the same hill after a storm and knows how mud can erase the meaning of a path. In summer, your bed is a raft on warm breath. The lamp invites insects from the tunnel, and the nights are stitched with their small, relentless prayers against the flame. Sweat glue your shirt to your back. You lie on the reeds with arms and legs splayed, a star drawn by a child who does not care for symmetry, and you tell yourself that the body is a machine with only a few needs. Water, warmth, a reason. 2 of those are supplied by your work. The third comes and goes. On certain nights, when the water's song is gentler and the men are quiet and the wind forgets its errand, you believe that the reason is simple and honourable, to carry something from a place that has it to a place that needs it. On other nights, when a flea finds the tender skin at your ankle for the 5th time and the cough moves closer, and the rat drops a bone on your chest as if to remind you where everything ends, you sleep only because not sleeping is worse. In winter, the blanket stiffens like a scolded child. Your fingers crack, and the cracks fill with lime that stings and then numbs. You wake with the ache of your hands forming their own prayer. The lamp sulks. Breath turns to frost on the timber above your face, and when it lets go, it kisses your cheek with a cold so intimate you could almost forgive it. The water, perversely, sounds warmer in winter, a low velvet purr, like a cat you cannot see rubbing along the walls. You pull your knees to your belly and make yourself as small as the day allows. The wind is cold again, just like yesterday, You tell yourself that a smaller target is harder for the night to hit. When sleep finally comes, it arrives sidewise like a shy animal, never when called. You find it in the moment after you finish counting the breaths between your neighbour's coughs, in the blink after the lamp chooses to steady itself, in the soft, ridiculous thought that perhaps tomorrow the overseer will assign you to an arch that faces the morning sun. Sleep brings a world so thin you can see through it to the stone beneath. In that world you walk along the top of the aqueduct and the city stretches left and right like a cloak, and the water is not in a channel but in the air, and every mouth is a fountain. You do not need to carry anything because everything carries itself. You know this is a lie while you dream it, which makes the lie kinder. And when the crow outside begins its sawtooth call, and the first cart of the day grinds a complaint across the stones above your head, and the overseer clears his throat 3 times in a row the way he always does before he remembers he has a voice, you open your eyes to the ceiling that has been there all night, and the damp that has been your companion, and the lamp that burned down to a coin of blackened oil, and the rat that pauses to consider whether your boot is a mountain worth climbing. You flex your hands. The reeds tell you how many hours you were still by the way they resume their old shapes. You listen to the water and hear it say the only thing it ever says again. You sit up carefully, because the ceiling is still close and the bruise on your forehead is still young. You fold your blanket with a care that feels like tenderness and might be. You tuck the rosemary sprig back into its pouch. You do not look at the chalk drawings because you know they have already gone back to wood. You splash your face with water that you did not have to carry, a miracle so ordinary no one remarks on it, and the cold climbs into your jaw and reminds your teeth to belong to your mouth. Around you, men curse and yawn and locate their boots as if they were tools abandoned by someone else. You join them because you are them. Before you go, while the overseer counts heads and the raven shakes his pouch to hear the city rattle inside it, you stand in the doorway of the hollow and listen to the water one more time, not as a worker but as a creature among other creatures. It runs. It has only ever run. You lay your hand on the wall and feel the slow heartbeat of seepage, the stone pulling the river into itself and then letting it go. The wind is cold again, just like yesterday. You draw your breath in and let it out and tell your body that it may try once more to be a home for you, and that you will try once more to be kind to the part of you that believes this is possible. Your pallet waits behind you, its shape the shape of your absence. It will welcome you again when the day is finished with you, when the archers have taught your back new ways to bend, when the lime dust turns your eyelashes pale, and the water writes its name on your skin in a script only you can read. For now you step forward into the throat of the tunnel where the city's thirst draws breath, and the dark is not an enemy but a lid, keeping the day warm until you lift it. Rest now while your feet are still dry, while the lamp's ghost clings to the air, while the water hums the promise it always keeps. Rest and let the sound carry you a little further than you were last night, just far enough to forget your name. You dress in the dark because the dark is quicker. In the hollow where you sleep, light takes its time finding you, whether from the sulking lamp or the slow, reluctant blade that leaks through the wall crack at dawn, and so your hands have learned to read cloth the way the overseer reads his tally stick. First the tunic, coarse wool that feels like the inside of an old rope, smelling faintly of wet sheep and the smoke of other men's fires. It's not your tunic in the way a cloak might be a nobleman's. It's a tunic that belonged to someone before you and will belong to someone after you, carrying the scent of each man in its threads like a library of sweat. The weave scratches at the softer skin under your arms. You pull it over your head, and the air inside feels briefly warmer before it remembers itself and turns cold again. Your belt is a strip of stiff leather with a buckle that sticks like an old tooth. The leather is stained with shapes you could pretend are maps. A continent you'll never see. A river that might flow all the way to the edge of the world. A lake shaped like a coin dropped in mud. It cinches the tunic so you can bend without flashing the whole crew, though no one here is delicate enough to care. Still, there's a strange comfort in keeping the wool close, as if tying it down might stop the day from blowing straight through you. The sandals are a lesson in endurance, thick soles cut from hide that once belonged to something faster and freer than you, now bound under your toes with straps the colour of old tea. The leather cracks in lines like a dry riverbed, and the cracks drink in dust until the whole thing looks carved from the road itself. You slip your feet into them, the edges rasping against the skin above your heel where last week they bit too deep. A smear of lime dust waits in the crease from yesterday, eager to bite again. Your toes already know where the straps will rub. The skin there has thickened in defiance, but defiance only lasts so long. Over the tunic goes the work cloak, not for warmth, though it pretends to be, but for shielding against the small insults of the day. The spatter of mortar, the flick of a chisel gone astray, the grit that rides the wind and finds your eyes. The cloak is heavy even when dry, which is almost never. It smells faintly of rain and faintly of mildew, like the breath of a forgotten cellar. You pull it close, and it hangs from your shoulders like an accusation. You chose this, or perhaps you failed to choose otherwise. Around your head, a strip of cloth to keep your hair from falling into your eyes while you work. It started white long ago, but the colour now is the complicated brown of water just before a storm. The knot at the back is muscle memory. Your hands could tie it while dreaming. On good days, the cloth soaks only sweat. On bad days, it drinks in mortar dust and shavings, until it stiffens into something more helmet than head wrap. Your hands go bare, unless a task promises to shred them. Then you wrap your palms in scraps of hide, each one cut down from the life of something that never knew the inside of an aqueduct. Gloves would be too fine a word. These are shields in the most meagre sense, a pause between skin and ruin. The leather holds the memory of old blood, yours or someone else's. When wet, they smell like the bottom of a bucket that's been left out too long. Everything you wear carries the day before on its back. Threads hold grains of sand from an arch you repaired last month. The sandals keep the shape of the climb to the cistern. The belt still tastes of the sweat that ran into it when you hauled a stone heavier than your good sense. The water teaches you that nothing is ever truly clean, only washed into a new layer of dirt. And as you pull each piece into place, tunic, belt, sandals, cloak, cloth, wraps, you notice that your body stops being yours in stages. The tunic claims your skin, the belt claims your middle, the sandals claim your feet, the cloak claims your shoulders. Piece by piece, the man who slept on reeds becomes the man who will stand in freezing water, scrape away the day's work of moss, haul buckets, and lift stones until his vision narrows to the size of his own breath. By the time the overseer shouts, you are dressed in the uniform of those the city will never thank, wool heavy with damp, leather split and mended, a strip of cloth to hold the world back from your eyes. None of it makes you warmer, not for long, but it marks you as part of the crew, and in this world belonging, even to misery, can be its own kind of shelter. The wind is cold again, just like yesterday. You pull the cloak tighter, though it makes no difference, and follow the others toward the mouth of the tunnel where the day waits with its hands already wet. Morning does not arrive here like it does in places with windows. It seeps in. It comes as a change in the taste of the air, a faint shift from the stale breath of night to something sharper, as though the city above has rolled over and cracked one eye open. You feel it before you see it. A new thread in the wind carrying the smoke of fires that have just been lit, the metallic tang of carts being unchained, the faint bitterness of bread left too long in the oven. You have been asleep for hours, or for moments. There's no way to tell. Time here moves like water through a crack, relentless, silent, and never in a hurry to explain itself. The overseer's throat clears first, always 3 times, a sound that cuts through dreams like a dull knife sawing through rope. After that, the sounds ripple outward. Men shifting on their reed mats, the slap of soles on damp stone, a groan or two from bodies that have to remember themselves before standing. You push your blanket aside, and it falls to the floor with a damp sigh. Your fingers are stiff, curled from the cold as if they spent the night holding something you can't remember. The first task of the morning is not dressing. You slept in most of your clothes. The first task is finding your way back into your body. You swing your legs over the side of the pallet, letting your feet find the gritty wetness of the floor. There's a moment before you stand when you pause, just to feel the weight of yourself, to check if the night has stolen anything important. Fingers? Toes? The small coin of willpower in your chest that keeps you from lying back down. If it's all still there, you rise. The air in the tunnel is cold enough to make your teeth ache, and it smells of lime and stone dust, of water wearing away at places men thought eternal. Someone mutters a joke about the smell, something about how the aqueduct crew always wakes up in a tomb. You don't laugh, but you carry the image with you for the rest of the morning. Your whole crew propped against the walls like statues in a forgotten burial chamber, the water still running past. You make your way to the wash bucket. It is half full, fed from a small leak in one of the upper channels, the water as clean as you'll see all day. The bucket is a battered thing, more dent than shape, with a rim polished by decades of hands. You cup your palms and bring the cold up to your face. The shock wakes something deeper than your eyes. It steals your breath and replaces it with something sharper. For a moment, the water is not a burden but a blessing, a silent agreement between you and the thing you serve. The water says, "You need me." You answer, "I know." Men shuffle in a loose order toward the bucket. Some only splash their faces. Others strip to the waist, scrubbing themselves with the ferocity of men trying to erase something they can't name. The Dalmatian hums tunelessly while he washes, as if the act itself is a song he learned as a child. Rufus spits into the water after rinsing his mouth, and the overseer glares but says nothing. He will not drink from this bucket today. Next comes the bread. Not breakfast, not really, just a strip of yesterday's loaf. Hard enough that you have to work at it. Your jaw complains, the sound of chewing loud in your head. Sometimes the bread tastes faintly of the sack it was stored in, sometimes of the hands that handed it to you. This morning it tastes of dust and a little salt. You chew because chewing is what the hour demands, not because you're hungry. Some mornings, if the quartermaster is in a mood, there's something more, a piece of salted fish, a smear of cheese that's already begun to curl at the edges, a fig so shriveled it looks more pit than fruit. You eat those in silence, not because of manners, but because moments of kindness in this place are so fragile you don't dare breathe too hard on them. The lamp from the night before is still smoking faintly in the corner. The overseer kicks dirt over it, and the room exhales into shadow. That's the signal. It's time to gather the tools. Chisels, hammers, picks, the odd assortment of hooked rods and scrapers that keep the water running as the engineers intended. You sling a coil of rope over your shoulder, its fibers stiff with old work, smelling faintly of mildew and iron. The weight is familiar. It belongs there as much as your own arm. No prayers are spoken, not aloud, but there's a private moment that each man takes before stepping into the tunnel proper. You rest your hand against the damp wall, just for a breath. You feel the heartbeat of the stone, slow, patient, unconcerned with your survival. You press your palm there anyway, as if to promise that you'll do your part to keep its veins open for another day. The march to the worksite is quiet. Boots slap softly on the stone, the rhythm of men resigned to the path. The tunnel curves, bends, widens, narrows, a living thing you know by touch and smell more than sight. Water runs somewhere just beyond the wall, close enough that you can feel its cool through the air. Every few steps, a drip falls from the ceiling, tapping your shoulder like an impatient god, reminding you to keep moving. When you emerge into the early light above ground, the city's breath hits you full in the face. Smoke, bread, manure, sweat. A tapestry of smells that could make you dizzy if you let them. The aqueduct arches rise ahead, pale and solemn against the brightening sky, each one carrying the weight of water and the memory of the men who bled to build them. The day has begun. and with it, the long work of keeping Rome's thirst from becoming its ruin. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you pull your cloak tighter, even though it won't help, and step into the shadow of the first arch. You put it off as long as you can. Everyone does, not because you have anywhere better to be, but because the place where nature meets necessity in the Aqueduct crew is a lesson in human humility and in the limits of tolerance for smell. The city above prides itself on its marble baths, on fountains that sparkle in the sun like melted silver, on the way its engineers can carry a mountain spring into the very heart of a market square. Down here, the truth is simpler. Water is for the living, and waste is for the shadows. The latrine is nothing like the noble public houses, where senators sit shoulder to shoulder discussing politics over running water. Ours is a narrow, low-roofed chamber, set into a side alcove off the service tunnel. You find it by following the change in the air, a sour, damp heaviness that sticks to the back of your throat before you've even turned the corner. The smell is ancient, layered ammonia, rot, and the unmistakable tang of lime dust that has fallen here for years, mixing with what no one wanted to think about in the first place. The foreman swears the smell keeps rats out. You know better. The rats just wait until you're gone. A shallow trench runs along the far wall, cut into the stone with a mason's care, though time and the work of many men have softened its edges. There's a trickle of water running through it, diverted from the smaller feeder channels. That's the flush. It moves slow, like a lazy snake, carrying away the morning's offerings towards some darker part of the system you've never seen, and have no desire to. The water there doesn't sound like the clean, purposeful flow of the main channels. It has a sullen tone, as though it resents the work it's been given. There are no partitions. Privacy is a luxury you shed your first week here. Men squat side by side, tunics hitched, eyes fixed either on the wall or on the nothingness in front of them. You learn to make your face blank, to think about other things, the shape of the clouds you saw that morning, the way the arches looked from the road, the dream you had of walking along the top of the aqueduct, with the whole city spread out below you. You never look at the man next to you. That's a rule without words. The floor is always damp. Always. Not with water you'd drink. Your sandals stick a little when you shift your feet. Once you saw a trickle from the trench break free, meandering across the stones toward the entrance like it had business elsewhere. No one stepped in its way. The lime in the walls tries to fight the smell, but it's a losing battle. The air clings to you even after you leave. On hot days, the stink rides your sweat like a second skin. On cold days, it hangs low in the air, heavy enough to taste. Sometimes you find a scrap of cloth left behind, someone's attempt at cleaning, or perhaps just the leavings of a man who didn't make it to the trench in time. The crew doesn't waste rags if they can be used for scraping mortar or wiping tools, but the ones that find their way here are gone for good. The water in the trench takes them, just as it takes everything else, toward the dark. You work fast, not out of shame that burned away long ago, but because the longer you stay, the more the place seems to notice you. The walls sweat here more than anywhere else, beading moisture like the skin of a fevered man. The ceiling drips occasionally, the drops landing with small, precise splashes in the running water. No one looks up to see where they come from. When you finish, you smooth your tunic back into place, careful not to brush the damp walls. You step aside for the next man without meeting his eyes. You make the walk back down the tunnel without hurrying, but without lingering, letting the fresher air of the main passage slowly push the stink back to the edge of your senses. And yet, for all its filth, there's something in the latrine that feels truer than the polished marble above. Here, no one pretends at elegance. The work of the body is as real as the work of the hands. Water comes in, water goes out, the city drinks, the city empties. You are only part of the cycle. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you adjust your cloak at the shoulders, grip your tools a little tighter, and return to the arches where the day's labour waits, pretending it doesn't know where you've just been. By the time the work bell in the overseer's head decides it is morning enough to feed you, Your body has already been awake for hours. You've been moving stone, scraping moss from the channel walls, or standing knee-deep in water that's too cold to belong to any living thing. And your stomach has been gnawing on itself in quiet protest. You don't notice hunger at first. You notice the tremor in your hands when you lift a chisel, the way your knees feel like hollow jars rattling with small pebbles. Then the smell comes, drifting from somewhere down the tunnel, the unmistakable flat scent of bread that has been old for longer than you've been awake. The meal is set up in the same service alcove where you'll eat every day you're lucky enough to still have work. There is no table, only a low plank balanced on 2 stone blocks, and on it sits a basket lined with cloth that might once have been white. Inside are loaves baked 3 days ago, maybe 4. The crust's as hard as terracotta. The bread has been cut into thick wedges. Though cut is too generous a word, it's been hacked apart with a blade so dull it frayed the edges. Each piece is roughly the weight of your palm, and shaped like something between a wedge and a weapon. Alongside the bread, there's a small jar of olives swimming in oil that has the green shimmer of pond water. They are wrinkled and sharp-smelling, a mercy against the blandness of the bread. Sometimes there's salted pork, cut thin enough to almost see through, its edges curling where the air has worked on it. Other times, dried figs, their skins tough but sweet if you can chew through them. Today it's a scattering of goat cheese, soft in some places, chalky in others, its scent walking the line between fresh and suspicious. The bread is handed to you by a man whose only job seems to be existing between you and hunger. He does not smile, does not speak. His hands are clean in the way hands can be when washed in cold water and wiped on a tunic already carrying yesterday's dirt. You take your wedge and step aside so the next man can pass. The bread is heavy in your hand, more like stone than food. You find a spot against the wall and lean your back into it, feeling the damp seep through your cloak. Biting into the bread is a small battle. Your teeth scrape against the crust until they find the softer inside, which is only softer in comparison, more pliable than the crust, but still stubborn. The taste is not bad, only absent, a blandness that forces your tongue to search for any trace of flavour. The cheese helps, melting slightly where it touches the warmth of your mouth, leaving behind a tang that clings to your tongue. You eat slowly, not because you want to savour it, but because swallowing too quickly feels like throwing stones into an empty well. It makes too much noise inside. Some men talk while they eat, swapping quiet jokes or murmuring about the day's work. Others eat in silence, staring at the opposite wall, as if trying to see through it to some place where the bread is fresh and the olives are plump and bursting with juice. The raven sits near you, turning an olive pit over in his fingers, as though it's a coin he's deciding whether to keep. Rufus, ever the opportunist, waits until the foreman turns his head, then snatches an extra fig from the basket with the sleight of hand of a man who has done this before. The oil from the olives seeps into your fingers, slick and fragrant. You wipe it on your cloak, knowing it will leave a mark that will never quite fade. The salt from the cheese stays on your lips, a small mercy against the tunnel's endless damp. You find yourself chewing longer than necessary, not because you like the taste, but because chewing means you don't have to think about the cold creeping back into your bones. Once in a while, on festival days or when the city's mood lifts for reasons beyond your understanding, the bread will be warm, fresh from a baker who owed someone a favour or was paid enough to care. On those mornings, the smell alone is enough to make the crew soften, shoulders lowering, voices easing into something almost like cheer. But those days are rare, and their memory fades fast. Today is just bread, cheese, olives, and the knowledge that you'll need every bite to face the hours ahead. When you're done, you lick the last crumbs from your fingers, because wasting even that much feels like an insult to the work you'll have to do to earn the next meal. The bread sits heavy in your stomach, like ballast in a ship's hull. You stand, adjusting your belt, feeling the food begin its slow journey toward the strength you'll need to lift stones, patch channels and climb ladders until your arms feel like they belong to someone else. The foreman calls out, a voice like gravel dragged over wood, and the crew stirs. Bread is swallowed, olives finished, cheese licked from fingers. The basket is pulled back into the shadows for tomorrow. The plank cleared. You step away from the wall, leaving behind a dark imprint where your back kept the damp at bay for a while. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you pick up your tools, the taste of salt still on your lips, and follow the others toward the arches, where the water waits to remind you that breakfast was never meant to be enough. The aqueduct doesn't greet you. It isn't that kind of companion. It stands in the morning light exactly as it did yesterday, pale, vast, and pretending not to notice you. The arches rise out of the ground like the ribs of a sleeping god, their shadows stretching long across the earth. Between them, the channels run unseen, carrying Rome's lifeblood with the same steady pulse they've kept for decades. You and the crew are not here to marvel. You are here to keep the pulse from faltering, to crawl into its veins and scrape away whatever slows it down. The foreman's orders are brief, and in a voice that always sounds like he's been chewing stone today, you're clearing sediment in the low channel east of the cistern and inspecting a section of mortar that's gone soft. That means cold water. That means climbing into places the sun has never touched. That means your knees and shoulders will remember every inch of it tonight. The tools clatter in the wagon as they're handed down. Chisels, hammers, iron scrapers, long-handled hooks, each one worn smooth by the ghosts of other hands. You take yours without looking too long at the fresh nicks in the metal. It's best not to think about the work they did yesterday that made them so. The rope you carried from the tunnel is knotted now, ready for lowering buckets and men into places where footing is a polite suggestion. You begin with the channel itself, a narrow trench running along the base of the aqueduct's lower level. The water is ankle deep here, clear enough to see the pale sand and occasional pebble beneath, but moving just fast enough to resist you when you step in. The cold is immediate, a bite that races up your shins and takes your breath before you can tell it to leave. Within moments your toes are numb, your calves aching in a slow, deep way that promises to linger. The work is simple in theory. Scrape away moss, silt, and anything else that clings to the stone where the water passes. In practice, it is a slow battle against things that have grown comfortable here. The moss feels slick under the scraper, giving way reluctantly in strips that cling to the tool until you shake them off. The silt is worse. Heavy and stubborn, it packs itself into corners, refusing to move without a fight. Every stroke sends small clouds drifting downstream, and the water carries them away without a word of thanks. Above you, two men are repairing the mortar in a cracked arch. They work with a rhythm born of repetition. One mixes the lime and sand until it looks like pale paste. The other presses it into the wound with the heel of his trowel. Chips of old mortar fall into the water beside you, splashing against your cloak. You brush them off before they turn into grit against your skin. The scent of fresh lime is sharp, cutting through the damp air, a smell you will carry home in your nose and hair long after the day ends. The foreman passes occasionally, his sandals slapping softly against the stone. He doesn't shout much, not anymore. He's learned that the work itself keeps men moving better than his voice ever could. Still, his presence is enough to make backs straighten, strokes quicken. You don't need him to tell you the truth. If the water stops moving here, the city above will know within hours, and no one will thank the men who fixed it. There are moments, though, when the monotony bends into something almost beautiful. A droplet clings to the edge of your scraper before falling into the water with a sound so pure it almost rings. The light slips between two arches just so, making the surface of the channel look like hammered gold for a breath before it fades back to plain silver. You see a fish. How it got here you'll never know. Dart between the shadows, a flicker of life in a place meant only for the city's thirst. Then the rope is lowered, and it's your turn to go down. The access shaft is narrow, the stones cold against your shoulders as you descend. The air changes halfway. Cooler, thicker, carrying the smell of water that's been trapped for years. At the bottom, your boots land in a space barely wider than your arms. The channel here is darker, the water slower, heavier with silt, Your breath echoes, bouncing off the stone walls, until it sounds like someone else is down here with you. You work by touch as much as by sight, scraping the build-up from the walls, feeling for cracks that might be hidden beneath the slime. Sometimes you find them, hairline fractures that feel like the skin of the aqueduct has been bruised. You mark them with chalk for the masons to mend later, knowing that if left alone, the water will pry them wider until the whole section gives. The hours pass in a rhythm you stop noticing. Scrape, lift, drop, breathe. The water numbs you enough that your legs feel distant, as if they belong to someone else. Your arms ache, your back protests every time you bend, but you keep going because stopping here means the day will outlast you. Above, a bucket of debris is hauled up, its rope creaking under the weight. Another is lowered in its place. You fill it without thinking, your hands finding the silt and moss like they were born for it. When you finally climb out, blinking against the light, the arches look different, less like ribs and more like the bones of a ship you've been trapped inside. The sun has shifted, shortening the shadows. The foreman nods once, not at you exactly, but at the work, and that's all you'll get. All you'll need. By the time you gather the tools and start the walk back toward the main tunnel, the cold in your legs has settled deep, the kind that will only leave when you're lying back on your reed mat tonight. The water keeps running behind you, clean and quiet, as if it never needed you at all. The wind is cold again, just like yesterday. You pull your cloak tighter, knowing tomorrow will taste the same, feel the same, sound the same, and that you'll be here anyway, keeping the pulse steady. Up on the streets, above the arches you keep alive, you are nearly invisible, not entirely. Invisibility is a privilege reserved for the wealthy, who can disappear behind high walls and paid messengers. You, on the other hand, are seen just enough to be dismissed. A citizen walking past the base of the aqueduct will look at you the way one glances at a bucket left in the rain, noticing it only because it's there, never imagining the work it does. When you move through the markets on errands for the foreman, fetching lime or sending word to the masons, people part for you in small, unthinking ways. Not out of respect. It's the clothes. The damp cloak with the lime stains, the leather sandals that smell faintly of wet stone, the head wrap with its tide mark of sweat and dust. You look like someone who carries the smell of underground water on their skin. And to the fine ladies buying pomegranates, to the bakers selling loaves hot enough to steam in the morning air, that smell is a hint of something unpleasant they'd rather not know exists. Children are the most honest. Some stare, some laugh when they see the state of your clothes or the streaks of mortar across your sleeves. Others trail behind you for a few paces, mimicking the slow, deliberate walk of someone carrying tools that bite if handled wrong. Once a boy tugged his mother's hand and asked why your skin looked damp like a frog's. She hushed him and pulled him away, but not before you caught her own glance. A flicker of pity, quickly replaced with the polite blankness Romans wear when they'd rather not feel anything at all. Among the other labourers, the masons, the road crews, the men who cart grain from the ports, you're treated as kin, but the kind of kin no one invites to the feast unless there's space to fill. You share the same calluses, the same stooped gait, the same way of glancing at the sky to guess the weather because you don't own a clock. They'll share bread with you, swap stories about overseers, offer a sip from their flask when the day is long. But there's always that unspoken understanding that your work is stranger, somehow more hidden, less clean. They build things the city can see. You keep something alive that most people will never even look at. The soldiers treat you with that blend of boredom and suspicion, reserved for anyone not under their direct command. If they pass while you're working, they'll nod curtly, eyes sliding over the tools, the rope, the bucket of moss and grit you've pulled from the water. Sometimes one will make a joke about whether you found any coins down there, as if you're panning for gold instead of scraping the skin off your knuckles in the dark. You learn to smile faintly and say nothing. It's easier than explaining. There's a sharper edge to the way the wealthy notice you when they notice you at all. Once, while repairing a channel near the outskirts of the city, you stood as a carriage passed. Inside, a young man in a white tunic looked down at you and then, very deliberately, looked away, his face settling into that fixed expression people use when they smell something sour but don't want to be rude. The carriage wheels threw a spray of dust across your legs, and for a moment you imagined stepping forward, grabbing the spokes, and asking him if he's ever thought about what happens when the water stops. You didn't, of course. The rope in your hand was heavy, and the day was not yet half over. There are exceptions. Once in a while, someone will speak to you as if the archers themselves had sent you. An old woman brought you a fig one afternoon when she saw you hauling debris from the channel near her home. She pressed it into your palm without a word, her fingers warm and dry, her eyes sharp with the kind of knowledge that comes from living too close to the edge of need. You ate it in 2 bites, the sweetness cutting through the taste of lime dust on your tongue. Mostly, though, you are tolerated, necessary in the way a millstone is necessary, not admired for the flour it produces, only noticed when it cracks. You are the kind of man people believe will always be there when needed, and who will fade neatly into the background the moment the work is done. Among your own crew, the treatment is different. Not kind exactly, but familiar in a way that keeps you steady. They'll mock you for working too slowly, call you soft if you shake your hands against the cold, steal the better olive from your plate without asking. But they'll also pass you the rope without a word when you're struggling, stand between you and the foreman when your temper slips, save you a place by the lamp when the night turns colder than expected. They know what it is to be unseen above ground, so they see you down here. Sometimes, when you're walking back to the tunnel at the end of the day, you catch your reflection in the water. Not clear, the current breaks it into pieces, but enough to see the lines in your face, the set of your shoulders, the way your eyes already look past the surface. And in that fractured reflection you realize the truth. The city treats you exactly as the aqueduct does. It uses you, depends on you, keeps you close enough to serve its thirst, but never calls you by name. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you turn from the water, your tools heavy in your hands, and follow the others back underground, where the only eyes on you belong to men who know exactly what you carry. You cannot keep clean here. It's not a failing. It's not laziness. It's the simple truth of living in a place where the walls sweat, where the air carries the breath of stone and water in equal measure, where the same cold current that keeps the city alive works its way into your skin and stays there. The aqueduct marks you. It works on you the way it works on its own walls, slowly, patiently, without ever pausing. The damp is the first enemy. It's clever, invisible, until it's too late. At the start, you notice it in your clothes, tunics that never fully dry, cloaks that hold a sour weight even after a day in the sun. Then it takes your skin, a rash on the back of the knees, blisters along the toes where the sandal straps rub against wet flesh. It moves inward, softening nails until they peel away, burrowing into the cracks at your fingertips until every scrape stings like fire. The overseer calls it the rot, as if naming it makes it manageable. It doesn't. There's lime dust in your hair, in your eyebrows, in the fine creases at the corners of your eyes. It dries you in strange places, even as the damp works everywhere else. Your skin alternates between chapped and raw, as if it can't decide which way to suffer. Some men try oil, olive, lamp, whatever they can find, rubbing it into their hands and arms at night, in the hope it will keep the cracks from deepening. But oil goes rancid in this air. You wake with the smell of it sour in your nostrils, and the rats take an interest they never should. The water itself is clean, at least in the main channels. You know it's cleaner than what most in the city drink. You've seen the wells, the buckets drawn up cloudy and sharp smelling, but working in it means something else entirely. You stand in it for hours, knees numb, the ache sinking into your bones until they feel hollow. You scrape moss with hands that are already bleeding, your knuckles whitening under the cold. By the time you leave the water, the damage is invisible but certain. In the days ahead, the joints swell, the nails thicken in self-defense. In the worst cases, the flesh between the toes turns soft and white, like the inside of a boiled bean, and peels away in strips. Coughs are constant. The air in the tunnels is cool but stale, touched with the scent of mildew and whatever grows where sunlight never reaches. When a man starts coughing, the sound echoes so far down the channel that you can't tell if it's coming from 2 steps behind you or 2 arches away. The coughs start dry, then grow wet, then turn into something you feel in your own ribs, even if it's not yours. Once it takes hold, it never truly leaves. The Dalmatian has been hacking since last winter. He spits between his boots and swears he'll outlive us all. But sometimes in the small hours you hear the cough dig deeper, and you know the day will come when the water will carry his name somewhere you can't follow. Fever is feared, but it comes rarely, not because the work is safe, but because those who burn too hot don't last long. The damp keeps most fires low, smouldering instead of flaring. A man with fever still turns up for work, because lying on a damp pallet without food is worse than standing in cold water with food. Fever makes the arches tilt, makes the stone shift underfoot. That's when accidents happen. A chisel slipping, a foot missing its hold, and when a man falls here, he falls into stone and water, neither of which forgives. There is a ritual to washing, though washing is the wrong word. At the end of the day, the crew returns to the tunnel and takes turns at the bucket fed by the same small leak that wakes you each morning. The water is shockingly cold, but it cuts the grime, lifts the lime from your hair in streaks. You scrub with your hands, with a rag if you have one. Soap is rare. When it appears, it's used like treasure, passed palm to palm until it's gone. No one stays at the bucket long. Too much washing in this cold is another way to end up coughing. The smell never leaves. It's in the seams of your clothes, in your hair, in the crook of your elbows, where sweat and dust settle together into something older than either. When you pass through the city, you can tell who has smelled it before. They don't wrinkle their noses. The ones who have never known it make faces they think are discreet. You get used to it, the way you get used to the sound of the water running. Always there, never asking permission. Now and then a man will disappear from the crew for a few days. No explanation is given. When he comes back, he's thinner, paler, his cough sharper. Sometimes he doesn't come back at all. The overseer doesn't say where they've gone, and no one asks. You just notice when the pallet beside you stays empty, when the sound of someone's particular snore is gone from the night, and you take smaller bites of bread for a while without knowing why. Disease is not a matter of if. Here, it is a matter of when, and of which one will choose you. You carry on not because you believe you'll escape it, but because the arches still stand, the water still moves, and your hands can still close around a scraper or a rope. That is the bargain. You give the aqueduct your body, and it gives you a place to stand until the bargain ends. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you wrap your cloak tighter though it smells of lime and mildew, and tell yourself the damp in your bones is only water passing through. Nothing more. You know better, but saying it helps. The aqueduct may carry water, but the crew lives under stone, not just the stone in the arches above, but the stone in the law. It is cold, heavy, and carved by hands you'll never see. You feel it most when someone breaks a rule. And there are rules, plenty of them, though few are written down anywhere you'd be allowed to read. Some are simple. Show up, take your place, keep the water moving. Some are as strange as they are old. Don't whistle in the tunnels after dark. Don't lean against the main channel with your bare back. Don't carry coins into the cistern. The overseer swears these ones keep the water pure, but you know they're really there, because somebody once made a mess of things and someone else wanted to make sure it never happened again. The punishments are not formal trials with judges and speeches. They are quick, quiet, and designed to keep the work from slowing. If you arrive late without reason, you'll work the coldest section of the channel that day, your boots filling with water before the sun has even thought of rising high enough to warm you. If you break a tool, you're given the dullest replacement and sent to chip mortar until your arms ache with the insult of it. For worse offences, Stealing from the stores, fighting another man in sight of the overseer, taking coin from someone outside the crew. The punishments cut deeper. Sometimes that means a flogging, leather straps that slap across your back until your breath comes in gasps, and you can't bear the weight of your own cloak. The sound carries in the tunnels, a slow rhythm that makes even the rats retreat. No one watches for long. You hear the first few blows, then turn your head away. Sometimes it means the worst shift of all night duty at the upper channel where the arches cross open country. It's not the height that unnerves most men, though the drop is enough to turn your stomach if you look too long. It's the silence. At night, the city's hum fades, and you're left with nothing but the wind slipping through the stone, whispering every bad thing you've ever done. You walk the length of the channel with a torch, checking for leaks, and each step feels like you're the only living thing in the world. For some men, that punishment is harder to carry than the lash. If the crime touches the city's water directly, fouling it, blocking it, or letting it run to waste, the law comes from above, and the punishment is no longer the overseer's to give. The equerry, the officials charged with Rome's water, will appear, and their presence changes everything. They wear clean tunics and speak like men used to being heard. They ask questions with no warmth in them. Where were you? Who else was there? How long was the water stopped? You answer carefully, because their decisions can send a man to prison, to the mines, or simply out of work with nothing but the smell of damp to show for the years he gave. Once, years ago, a man named Lucius poured oil into a section of the channel as some sort of joke, or maybe to kill the moss faster. No one knows for sure. The oil slicked the water for miles, leaving a bitter taste in the mouths of everyone in that district. The equerry had him flogged in the forum, where the public could see. They said it was to make an example of him. You heard later he was sent to dig in the quarries, where the dust is thicker than the air and the walls never sweat. No one has seen him since. The law here isn't about justice, it's about the water. The city doesn't care if you fight, steal bread, or curse the foreman until your throat aches. But if you stop the flow, if you make the water hesitate on its way from the hills to the fountains, you've committed a crime worth remembering. The aqueduct is the city's throat, and anything that chokes it is treated like an enemy. Among the crew, there's a quieter law, unwritten but enforced just as fiercely. You do not let another man's mistake become the overseer's problem. If a chisel slips and cracks a stone, you help him patch it before the foreman notices. If someone falls behind clearing moss, you scrape twice as fast until the section is clean. If a man is caught drinking more than his share from the cold trickle at the wash bucket, you stand between him and the others until tempers cool. Because here, punishment isn't just given to the guilty. The work has a way of spreading it around, the way water seeps into every crack. You've seen men break under the rules. Not loudly, not with shouting. They just stop. They show up later and later. They swing their tools slower. They let the moss grow a little thicker before scraping it away. And then one morning they're gone, replaced by someone younger, someone who hasn't yet learned that the law is heavier than the tools it carries. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you keep your head down as you pass the overseer, knowing you've done nothing to invite punishment today, but also knowing that here, that's never entirely in your hands. Down in the tunnels, under the arches, religion doesn't look like the polished shrines in the city squares or the solemn processions on feast days. Here, it's quieter, rougher, and half hidden under layers of habit and dirt. You don't see priests in white robes carrying incense. You see men muttering to themselves before climbing down a shaft, pressing a thumb into the damp wall like they're leaving a part of themselves behind in case they don't come back. The official gods of Rome are welcome. Of course, Jupiter, Neptune, Minerva, but they feel distant here, too far above the ground, too fond of open air and clean marble. Down here, the water has its own spirits. No one agrees on their names. Some call them nymphs, some call them guardians, some just call them the old ones. The foreman insists they're nonsense, but even he tosses a crumb of bread into the channel before the first shift on the calends of March, for luck. He says it's just tradition. You've seen the way he doesn't meet anyone's eyes when he does it. Men wear charms on leather cords under their tunics, little bronze fish, river stones with holes in them, knotted strings that smell faintly of rosemary. They don't show them to the overseer, but you've seen them glint when someone bends to lift a bucket. One man, Servius, keeps a tiny clay figure tucked into the fold of his belt. It's nothing more than a lump with eyes, worn smooth from years of his thumb rubbing its back. He swears it's the spirit of a spring his grandfather tended, and that it keeps him from slipping when he's walking the high arches. Maybe it's true, he's never fallen. There's a superstition about whistling in the tunnels after dark. Supposedly it calls the water's shadow, a thing that follows the flow unseen and takes the shape of whoever is foolish enough to summon it. The older men say it will walk beside you for the rest of your shift, matching your steps, waiting for the moment when you stop to rest so it can step into you and take your place. You laugh when you first hear it, but later, alone in the shaft with only your torch and the sound of water, you keep your lips pressed shut. Some men refuse to say certain words near the channel. Empty is one of them. So is still. They believe the water listens, and if it hears those words, it will try to become them. You've caught yourself pausing mid-sentence when one of those slips toward your tongue. It's easier to choose another word than to tempt something that moves hundreds of miles without ever being seen in full. The changing of shifts has its own little rites. The man coming off work will slap the damp wall twice as he leaves, a sign to the water that he's done his part, and it's someone else's turn. The man replacing him will dip his fingers into the channel and smear the cold on the inside of his wrists. You tell yourself it's just habit, a way to wake the skin, but on days when you skip it, the work feels heavier, the tools more stubborn in your hands. When the weather turns foul, some of the crew will burn a twist of dried laurel near the entrance to the tunnel, letting the smoke drift inside before they step through. The foreman pretends not to notice. Laurel is for victory, and maybe that's what they're hoping for. Victory over the cold, the damp, the small accidents that can turn into something larger in an instant. There are older beliefs still, ones whispered in dialects you don't recognize, brought by men from the provinces. They speak of underground rivers that run beside the aqueduct, invisible but listening, carrying the voices of the dead. One man swears his brother's voice came up through the water during a night shift, telling him to leave the city before the next harvest. He left without collecting his pay. No one ever saw him again. The story changes each time it's told, but the part about the water speaking that never does. Official religion comes to you rarely. Once a year, an Aquarius or a city official will offer a small sacrifice at a fountain fed by your section. A white goat, a libation of wine, a scattering of flowers. The crowd claps. The priests smile. The water sparkles as if pleased. You watch from the edge, unnoticed, knowing that before the day ends you'll be back in the tunnels, scraping moss from the same stones, your hands smelling of lime and algae. The gods above may accept the offerings, but the spirits below demand daily work. And yet, for all the quiet superstition, there is comfort in it. The water is constant, but you are not. You get sick. You grow old. You vanish. The arches outlast you. The channel doesn't care if you believe in its guardians or not. Still, there's something in pressing your palm to the stone before a shift, in nodding to the flow before you step into it, in pretending for a moment that the water knows you, not as a nameless worker but as a keeper. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you spit once into the channel, for luck, for habit, for no reason at all, and watch the current carry it away without a ripple. Then you pick up your tools and follow the others into the dark, where the only blessing worth having is the sound of the water still running. Dinner is not a feast here. It is an end, not just to hunger, but to the day's weight on your body. By the time it comes, the light outside is slanting low across the arches, and the wind has changed. You feel it in the stone first, a subtle cooling under your palm as you lean to scrape the last moss from a seam, then in your shoulders as the air sharpens. The foreman doesn't call it dinner. He just grunts, and the crew begins to coil ropes, to stack the tools against the tunnel wall, to let the water keep flowing without them for a few hours. The eating place is the same as breakfast. The low plank, the shadows pooling in the corners, the damp still clinging to the air. But the mood is different. You've earned whatever waits on the board, even if it's nothing special. Tonight, it's bread again, but softer than the morning's wedge. Still dense, still carrying the faint tang of flour that's travelled far in sacks, but warmed from sitting near the small brazier someone managed to coax into life. That brazier is a prize. A clay pot with a shallow bed of coals, fed with whatever scraps of wood or charcoal can be spared. You gather around it instinctively, your knees bent, your hands extended toward the faint heat like plants leaning toward the sun. There's a pot beside it, low and dented, its lid rattling slightly. The smell inside is thin, but welcome. A broth made from bones saved and boiled until they surrendered their flavour to the water. Floating in it are shreds of cabbage, a few hunks of carrot, and the occasional ribbon of something that might be pork, fat rendered almost translucent from the hours of simmering. The ladle is passed without hurry, each man dipping in and filling his cup, careful to catch one of the rare solid pieces, along with the cloudy liquid. You cup the tin in your hands, letting the heat seep into your fingers before taking a sip. It is salty, faintly sweet from the carrot, and smoky from the wood that burned beneath it. It is also thin enough to see the bottom of your cup, but you drink it as if it could fill you. Olives appear again, glistening dark in their oil, and a small dish of salted fish is set out. The fish are small and curled, their flesh dense, their salt enough to make your mouth water before the first bite. You tear one in half, the brine waking your tongue after the blandness of the bread. A man across from you, Flaccus, has saved a small piece of cheese from the morning, and he cuts it into shavings to share. The gesture is wordless, but each sliver is taken with a nod that means more than thanks. The talk is low, a murmur that blends with the constant background hum of the water somewhere beyond the wall. Men compare the day's work, the stubborn section of mortar that finally gave way, the way the rope slipped near the east channel and nearly sent Servius into the cold. Someone makes a joke about the moss growing faster than the city's sense. Laughter follows, soft and short-lived, but real. Even the foreman smiles, though he hides it behind the bread. You eat slowly, not out of politeness, but because you want the warmth to last. Every bite is a reminder that the day is ending, that you've carried yourself through another set of hours without breaking, without vanishing into the water's endless pull. You mop the last streaks of broth from your cup with the heel of bread, the salt from your fingers mixing with the faint smoke in the crust. When the food is gone, the brazier burns lower, the red coals pulsing gently in the half-dark. Some men linger, cupping their hands over the last of its heat. Others stretch out on their pallets already, their cloaks pulled tight, their eyes half closed. You sit a moment longer, the taste of salt still on your lips, the hum of the water filling the space where words might go. The meal leaves you neither full nor hungry, just balanced, the way the arches stand in balance against the sky, enough to let you lie down without your stomach turning in on itself, enough to give you the strength to reach for sleep. Tomorrow will be the same: bread, broth, olives, fish, the quiet companionship of men who have learned that food is less about pleasure and more about continuation. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you rise, wipe your fingers on the edge of your cloak, and make your way to your pallet. The stone underfoot is cool, the air already carrying the damp of night. You think briefly of the city above, the lamps being lit, the noise of taverns, the smell of richer meals carried on the air. But the thought passes. Your world is here in the shadow of the arches, where the water never stops and the day always ends in the same quiet way. Sleep doesn't come easily here, not in the way it might for men who lie on soft pallets in dry rooms. Down in the tunnel, it arrives like a wary guest, slipping in only when you've stopped noticing the sound of the water, the breathing of the men around you, the occasional scrabble of something small in the dark. You close your eyes to the same damp blackness you see when they're open. And if you're lucky, your mind begins to unspool into dreams. The first dreams are often simple, your body replaying the day's work. You dream of scraping moss, but the moss grows back as fast as you remove it, curling in green waves over the stone, swallowing your tools. You dream of lowering buckets into shafts that have no bottom, the rope passing endlessly through your hands until your palms burn and your arms give out. These dreams are not frightening, only exhausting, and when you wake from them you feel as though you've done another day's labor. Then there are the dreams the water brings. The old men swear it has a memory, that if you listen while you sleep it will show you the places it's been. Snow melt in the mountains, hidden springs deep in the earth, streams that have run since before Rome had a name. In those dreams you are not yourself. You feel weightless and ancient, carrying with you the taste of everything you've touched. Iron from the rocks, pollen from mountain flowers, the faint sweetness of soil, untouched by the city. Sometimes the water's dreams turn stranger. You find yourself walking the top of the aqueduct at night, the city spread out below like a handful of scattered embers. No one else is there. The arches hum beneath your feet. The channels whisper in a language you almost understand. You look down into them and see not water but faces. Faces you know and faces you've never seen, drifting past as though the current has claimed them. Some look peaceful. Others look as though they're still trying to speak. You wake from those dreams with the taste of cold metal in your mouth, and the feeling that you've overheard something not meant for you. There are warmer dreams too, though they are rare. You dream of the hill where you were born, the smell of thyme in the sun, your mother's voice calling you in from the fields. You dream of bread that steams when it's broken, of wine that warms your chest without souring your stomach, of lying under a sky so wide you could spill your thoughts into it without them bouncing back. These dreams fade quickest, slipping away before you've even sat up, leaving only the faint ache of having been somewhere you can't return to. On harder nights, the dreams turn into reminders of the city above. You're standing in the forum, surrounded by people in clean tunics who look right through you. You try to speak, but your voice is drowned out by the sound of water rushing under the stones, a sound only you seem to hear. You follow it through streets and alleys until you reach a fountain, one you've repaired many times, and you watch as the water there runs red, not with blood exactly, but with something thicker, slower. You wake with your hands clenched in the blanket, and the feeling that the arches are leaning a little closer over your palate. The raven once told you he dreams only in black and white now, the colours leached out by the constant grey of the tunnel. You didn't believe him until you noticed the same thing. The greens of moss, the reds of clay, the gold of morning light, all gone from your dreaming. In their place are shades of stone, the pale silver of water under moonlight, the dark brown of bread crusts, the black of the tunnel mouth. When colour appears, it startles you awake, like seeing a bird you thought extinct. And yet, no matter what form the dreams take, they always end the same way. You hear the water, not rushing, not roaring, just moving, the same low hum that fills the tunnels while you work. It carries you back to the surface of waking, back to the damp air and the smell of lime and the weight of the blanket on your chest. The arches wait, exactly where you left them. The wind is cold again, just like yesterday. You roll onto your side, close your eyes once more, and let yourself drift back into whatever the water has planned for you next. Because here, in the belly of the aqueduct, even your dreams are not entirely your own. The danger is always there, even when it isn't moving. It lives in the arches, in the water, in the stone beneath your feet. It waits in the cracks you can't see, in the shadows where the torchlight doesn't reach, in the way your body begins to tire just when you need it most. You don't think about it every minute of the day. If you did, you'd go mad, but you carry it with you the way the water carries silt, always present, always settling in the corners. The most obvious thing that could kill you is the fall. The aqueduct doesn't care how long you've worked it. One wrong step on the high arches, and you'll drop until the ground decides what shape you're going to take. The wind up there is different, quicker, colder, slyer, It pushes against your back when you're walking, tugs at your cloak, tries to pull you just enough off balance. You keep your eyes forward, not because the view would make you dizzy, but because looking down is an invitation to think about the space between you and the earth. Then there's the water itself. It looks harmless in the channel, sliding along as if it has nowhere better to be. But get caught in it where the current narrows and it will drag you forward faster than you can grab the walls. If it pins you against a grate, you'll feel the pressure in your ribs before you can call for help. Men have drowned in channels shallow enough to stand in. All it takes is one slip, one bad turn, a head knocked against stone. The water will carry you along, unbothered, until someone finds you where the arches bend. The stone is a quieter killer. It doesn't fall often, but when it does, it doesn't miss. A crack hidden under a smear of moss can give way when you lean into it. Mortar that's looked solid for years will crumble the moment you trust it with your weight. You work under arches that have stood since before you were born, but you've seen what they can do to a man when they decide to change shape. And then there is the slow death, the kind that works from the inside out. The damp wears your lungs down first. You start with a cough you can laugh off, just a tickle from the lime dust. Then it grows, catches in your chest, makes it harder to draw a deep breath without feeling something tear. The old men have it worst, hacking until they spit blood into the channel, wiping it away with the back of their hands, going back to scraping as if the water might forget what it saw. Infection is another constant shadow, a cut from a chisel, a scrape from a rough edge of stone. In the city, it's just an inconvenience. Down here, it's a door the damp is always knocking on. You've seen wounds turn black at the edges, the skin swelling until it feels hot enough to burn. A man can be healthy one day and shivering under a blanket the next, his breath shallow, his eyes clouded. You learn to keep your own knife clean, to wash your hands in the cold trickle whenever you can, though you know it's never enough. Animals are less of a threat, but they're there. Rats bold enough to gnaw through rope, snakes that curl in the warm gaps between stones, wasps that build their paper nests in the quiet corners of the arches. You learn not to disturb them unless you have to. Most of them aren't here for you. They're here for the same reason you are. The water. The law can kill you too, in its own way. Not with a blow or a fall, but with absence. The absence of work, of food, of the small coin you send home if you have anyone left to send it to. A mistake in the wrong section of channel can mean dismissal. And dismissal means you're just another body in the streets, waiting for the cold or hunger to decide which one will claim you first. And sometimes it's none of these. Sometimes it's just bad luck. You're in the wrong place when a rope frays. You step where the stone is weaker than it looks. You lean too far into a shaft to retrieve a tool, and the world tilts the wrong way. Men have died for less than that, with no warning and no drama, leaving nothing behind but the sound of the water moving past them, unchanged. The old ones say the aqueduct keeps its own tally, that it knows how many hands it needs, and when it's time, it takes one away, quickly, cleanly, like removing a cracked tile. You tell yourself you don't believe it, but some mornings when you stand under an arch and feel the weight above you, you wonder if it's measuring you already. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you pull your cloak tighter, keep your eyes on the stone in front of you, and step carefully, as if the archers are watching to see if today is the day they call your name. You know the aqueduct from the inside out, the scrape of its walls beneath your fingers, the way its arches sound when the wind moves through them, the exact shift in pitch when the water speeds up or slows. But that knowledge comes at a price. It trades you the rest of the world. The arches are your horizon, and everything beyond them is mostly stories told by other people, or shapes you catch in passing and never touch. You'll never see the true beginning of the water. You've heard of the springs in the hills, of the clear pools where the engineers take their measurements, of the way the water there moves in open light, running free before it's harnessed by stone. You picture it sometimes, bright as glass, cool enough to make your teeth ache, tasting of nothing but itself, but you'll never drink from it. By the time the water reaches you, it's already been claimed, already moving to serve the city's thirst. You only see the tamed current, never the wild one. You'll never see the rooms where Rome's rich gather to talk about the water you keep moving. You hear of marble floors so polished they reflect the lamps above them, of maps carved into walls to show where each aqueduct runs, of silver cups filled with wine cooled in the very channels you repair. You imagine the men who sit there, their hands soft, their robes white, speaking of water, as if it were a tool they themselves had shaped. Your name will never pass their lips. If they think of the men who work in the arches at all, they imagine shadows with strong backs, as interchangeable as the stones themselves. You'll never see the city's night from its highest points. You've been up on the arches, yes, but always during the day, always with work in your hands and the foreman's voice at your back. You've never stood there in darkness, looking down at the lamps burning in the streets, at the glow from the bathhouses, at the moonlight turning the Tiber into a silver thread. Men say it's a view that makes you believe in gods or in luck or in whatever force keeps the city from swallowing itself whole. For you the nights belong to the tunnel, to the drip of water, to the dim ring of a single oil lamp. You'll never see the great fountains when they run at full force. You've been to them when they're dry, sent to scrape out the basins or repair a crack in the lip. Without water, they're just stone bowls and statues of gods who look bored with their own grandeur. But in the city square, on market days, the fountains roar, clear streams leaping into the air, catching the sun so they glitter like chains of glass. People gather there not just to drink, but to watch, as if the water is performing for them. You keep it moving, but you never get to see it dance. You'll never see the far edges of the city, where the aqueduct ends and the countryside begins again. You know your assigned section, its arches, its channels, its floors, the way some men know the lines on their own palms. But there are miles of stone you'll never walk, channels you'll never clean, springs you'll never hear. Somewhere beyond them there are hills, rivers, forests that don't care whether Rome is thirsty or not. You'll never stand in them long enough to forget the weight of the arches. You'll never see the faces of the people whose thirst you quench. You know they're there, in the tenements, in the bakeries, in the markets, dipping their cups, filling their jars, splashing their children's faces with water that passed through your hands an hour before. But you'll never watch them drink. You'll never hear the sigh when the first swallow cools their throats. The water's journey from your section to their lips is a mystery you're not meant to solve. You'll never see the city without the aqueduct. It's said that before the arches, before the channels, people hauled water in skins and jars from wells and streams, paying in sweat for every drop. Now the water runs day and night, as constant as breath. You keep it that way. You've never known the city to be silent, to be still, to be without the sound of fountains and the glisten of wet stone in the sun. You never will. And there are things smaller, stranger, that you said'll never see. The sunrise from the high road beyond the walls. The way a ship looks when it first appears on the horizon. The inside of a senator setter's house. The mountain snows that feed your channel. The ocean. Men tell you about these things in bits and pieces. Over bread or broth, their voices soft as if the words themselves are precious. You try to picture them. Sometimes you succeed. More often they blur into shapes that feel like dreams possible, but belonging to someone else's life. The wind is cold again. Just like yesterday, you lean against the wall of the tunnel, the damp pressing through your cloak, and you listen to the water. It knows the places you'll never see. It's been to them all, and it never tells you what they're like. It just keeps moving, past you, past the arches, past the edges of your world. When you're gone, the arches will still stand, the water will still run, the moss will still creep back over the stones you scraped clean, and someone else's hands will take the scraper and begin again. The city will drink as it always has, without pause, without thought for the men who kept its throat open. If you want to know what you leave behind, you have to look closely, because the world won't stop to show you. You don't leave behind wealth. There's never been enough coin in your pouch to last beyond the week. The few things you own will pass to whoever sleeps on your pallet next. Your belt worn soft where your hand rests while you work. Your sandals cracked and patched, still carrying the shape of your feet. The headcloth you've knotted 100 times without thinking. Even your blanket, smelling faintly of smoke and damp wool, will belong to someone else before the season turns. Objects here don't hold memories. They're too busy surviving. You don't leave behind a name that matters beyond the crew. Above ground, names are carved into marble when they've moved armies or paid for temples. Yours will vanish into the noise of the city like a drop of water swallowed by the Tiber. Down here, maybe one or two will remember it for a while. Men will say, "This was Servius's section," or "Remember when Flaccus slipped here." But in time, they'll be talking about the man who came after you. The work swallows names. You might leave behind a scar in the stone, a patch you mended in haste that looks different from the rest. The mortar a shade lighter because the lime was fresh that day, or a scratch where your chisel slipped. Thin as a reed, but deep enough to catch the fingertip of someone who notices. No one will know it was yours, but you might like to think the water does. You might leave behind a story, not for the city, but for the crew. How you once climbed the high arch in a storm to clear a blockage before the channel overflowed, lightning crawling along the horizon. How you lost a sandal in the lower shaft and worked barefoot the rest of the day. How you swore you saw a fish in the upper channel where no fish should be. These stories will change in the telling, growing taller or stranger, until they're barely yours anymore. That's the way of stories here. They belong to the water once they're told. If you have a family, you leave behind the coins you've managed to save. Not many, never enough, but enough to buy bread for a week, maybe two. Enough for them to remember that you sent something back as often as you could. Maybe they'll light a small oil lamp for you. Maybe they'll just keep the coin and say nothing. Both are the right kind of remembering. Mostly, you leave behind the work itself, the channel you kept clear through winter's freeze, the arch you reinforced with fresh mortar so it wouldn't shift under the weight, the stretch of water that passed under your hands through your shadow before spilling into the city. None of it bears your mark. None of it calls you its keeper. But for a time it was yours to tend, and that is more than many get. And there's the other thing, the thing no one talks about, because it sounds foolish to say aloud. You leave behind the sound of water in the dark, moving without hurry, without pause. It will be there long after your footsteps have faded from the tunnel floor. It will flow past the place where you slept, past the wall you leaned on when your back ached, past the stones that once felt the weight of your hands. Maybe someone else will hear it one night and think it's speaking to them. Maybe it will be. The wind is cold again, just like yesterday. You think of the first day you stood under the arches, looking up at the weight above you, wondering if you'd survive a week. You did. You survived more than that, long enough to leave behind something the city will never name but will drink every day, long enough for the water to know you were here. When you're gone, no one will write it down, no one will carve it into marble, but the archers will remember in their own way, by standing, by holding, by carrying the flow onward. And maybe, if the water is in the right mood, it will hum your name in the dark just once before carrying it away. The day is finished. Not in the sense that the work is done, the work is never done, but in the way a tide finally retreats, leaving behind the shapes it has carved and the shells it has scattered. You return to the hollow where you sleep, the air cool and damp as always, smelling faintly of stone, wool, and the faint tang of lime. The others move around you in slow, familiar patterns, cloaks hung where they will still be damp in the morning, tools stacked neatly in the corner, sandals kicked off with the resigned carelessness of men who know they will wear them again tomorrow. You sit on the edge of your reed mat, feeling the day still clinging to you. Your back hums with the weight of stone carried. Your hands ache in the soft webbing between thumb and forefinger. Your knees hold a dull throb from the cold water. The ache is a kind of ledger, a record of what you traded to keep the archers standing another day. You lean forward, elbows on your knees, and let the tunnel's silence seep into you. It isn't true silence. The water is always there, moving just out of sight, but it's the closest this place comes to stillness. Someone coughs in the dark. Someone else mutters half a joke that trails off into nothing. The raven turns in his sleep, the sound of his pouch shifting faintly like coins in another man's dream. The lamp in the corner burns low, the oil almost gone, the flame small enough to look shy. Its light softens the rough edges of the walls, makes the damp sheen like polished marble. Shadows bend and sway, as if they too are tired of standing. You stretch out, the blanket scratchy but warm enough to begin dulling the chill in your bones. The reeds press their memory into your back, recognizing you as they have so many nights before. You close your eyes. Behind your lids the arches rise again, not as they are in daylight, but as they sometimes appear in dreams, endless, perfectly even, stretching not toward a city but toward the horizon, carrying water into a place you'll never see. Breath slows. The sound of the water becomes a pulse, steady and certain. It moves without your help now, the way it always has and always will. You imagine it carrying pieces of you, the dust from your hair, the salt from your skin, the heat from your hands, out into the city, into fountains, into cups, into the throats of strangers who will never know your name. Thoughts drift. The weight in your limbs deepens, turns to an anchor pulling you towards something softer than sleep but heavier than waking. You think, for just a moment, of the things you'll never see, of the people who will never see you, and it doesn't feel bitter anymore. It feels like release. The lamp gutters, the flame bowing once before it folds into darkness. The tunnel holds you like the inside of a closed hand. The air is cool against your cheek. Somewhere the water whispers to itself, a story you're too far gone to follow. No one remembers your name, but that's all right. There are no wolves at the door, no cold in your bones now. You have survived another day. Sleep now.